Hey, welcome to my Redhead Professor YouTube channel. And on this episode, we're going to be looking at cost, value, and profit analysis. Let me see if I can get this just a tad bigger. Oh, come on. Let's see. Good grief. Gotta love technology. All right, cost, volume, profit analysis. It is exactly what it sounds like. Cost, volume, profit analysis. We're looking at each piece, cost, volume, and profit. We're looking at how they relate to each other. Does higher costs mean more profit? Does more volume mean more costs and more profit? Does it just mean more costs? What is the optimal level of the costs or volume to create the best profit? So there are some different analysis we can run, and we can hopefully come up with the best, most profitable volume and cost scheme. So when we're looking at cost, volume, profit analysis, we're going to be looking at the costs to try and figure out what type of volume we need to have to get the best cost to drive the best profit. So to do that, we have to figure out what the activity drivers or the activity bases are. What are the activities that cause the cost to change? So I like activity drivers because if you think of something like an automobile, if you have an automobile that you've purchased with a loan, you have a steady payment every month. And so that is more of a fixed cost. Well, it is a fixed cost until the loan is paid off. But in the meantime, you have gasoline for the car. You have to put more in it the more you drive, so that drives the cost of the gasoline. So if you don't drive the car at all, your gas prices are going to be very low. If you drive all over the place from Florida to Alaska to Maine to California, you're going to have higher gas prices and gas costs. So the driving activity drives the cost. So the thing that you need to think about when you're looking at activity drivers or activity bases, you're looking at activities that cause costs to change. So not just activities, like if it was how many times did you open your car door? Well, theoretically, you wouldn't be opening your car door unless you were getting in it to drive it somewhere. But opening of the car door does not actually drive the cost of how much fuel you were putting in it. It doesn't correctly reflect the activity, and it doesn't cause the costs to change. Then the next thing we're looking at is the variable costs. We have two primary costs. We have the variable and the fixed costs. Variable are just what they sound like. They vary. They change or vary in proportion to the changes in the activity drivers. So you drive your car more, you have higher gas prices. You drive your car less, you have less gas prices. Or gas costs, I guess. Then we have the fixed costs. They don't change when the activity base changes. So again, drive it all over the planet or let it sit in the driveway. Those fixed costs do not change. They're going to remain the same month in and month out. Then we also have this other category, this mixed cost category. They are a combination of fixed and variable costs. We're not really going to focus on them on this part of cost, volume, profit analysis, but just so you know, in the back of your mind, they aren't always completely clear cut with fixed and variable. Sometimes they are a mixture of the two. But for this part, we're kind of ignoring them. So just another rehash. Think car payment for fixed. Variable cost varies on the activity, how much you're driving it, what you're doing. So activity drivers drive those costs. So the first method that we're going to look at in this cost, volume, profit analysis is the high-low method. We're looking at ways that we can figure out what our fixed costs are, what our variable costs are, how can we pull these apart. Sometimes they're not super clear, like in the example of a car payment and gasoline, it's pretty easy. We don't have a lot of costs. We just have a payment and we have gasoline. So they're pretty easy to pull apart. But like in a manufacturing company that has several products and a lot going on, lots of costs going in and coming out, you need maybe something a little less, something that isn't as specific. So you can do it quick. And one method for doing this is the high-low method. The high-low method looks at your highest cost activity months. So total cost of high activity and subtracts the total cost of low activity. The theory behind the high-low theory, or the high-low method, is that your fixed costs are going to be the same whether you have a lot of activity going on or none. So back to that car example, whether you're driving it all over the planet or it's sitting in your driveway, the fixed costs are going to be the same. So if you take your highest activity and subtract out your lowest activity, you're going to get those fixed constant costs. And then we're going to divide that by the difference in units produced. The highest activity units produced on that highest cost level, and then the lowest activity units that you had on that lowest cost level. So what's the difference between the two? And then once we get that gives us our variable cost per unit, which we can work backwards into what our fixed costs are. And we do that by taking our total costs, which we're going to know the total cost. We're going to be able to figure that one out. We're trying to pull them apart and figure out what's variable, what's fixed. So we take the variable cost per unit that we just calculated in the previous division problem, and we multiply it by the units produced. And that should give us what our fixed costs are. So let's just pull up an example of it. So here we have total costs and total units for a full year, January through December. We've got the total costs, the total units for each month. So the highest month was March, highlighted in yellow. We had $125,000 in costs, and we had 2,500 units produced. The lowest month was January. We had costs of $80,000 and total units of 1,000. So to figure out our variable cost per unit, we are going to take our highest cost to figure out that first part, and we're going to subtract out our lowest cost. So highest activity cost, lowest activity cost. It's going to give us the difference between 125,000 and 80,000. And then we're going to do the same thing for the units at each level. So at the highest level, we had 2,500 units, and the lowest level, we had 1,000 units. So the difference between those two units, of the production units that we had, was 1,500. So if we take the difference in total cost, which was 45,000, and we divide it by the difference in units produced, we will end up, with 45,000 divided by 1,500 units. So we come up with a $30 variable cost per unit. Then we take that variable cost per unit and we can plug it into this fixed cost formula, and we can try and pull out what our fixed costs are. What are the costs that remain if we have no activity? So fixed costs, we're going to take the total costs. So let's do our highest month first. Again, this is the high-low method, so we're looking at the highest and lowest months. So total cost, 125,000. Then we're going to take variable cost per unit times units produced. So variable cost per unit, we had just calculated up here, is $30. Then we're going to multiply it by the units produced. Well, in the 125,000 month, we had 2,500. So let's just pull that down a little bit. So 125,000 is this total cost minus the variable cost per unit times units produced. So 30 times 2,500 gives us 75,000. So if we take the total costs, 125,000, subtract out the variable cost per unit times units produced, which was 75,000, we end up at 50,000. So our fixed costs are 50,000. And every unit that we produce has a variable cost of $30 a unit. So this is, again, the high-low method. So we're going to look at the high. We can confirm with the low. So on the low side, we had $80,000 in costs and contribution margin of 30 still. And we produced 1,000 that month. So let's pull 80,000 down. Oops. That one times that gives us 80,000 in total cost minus variable cost per unit of 30,000 times units produced. So we had 30,000. So 80,000, subtract out 30,000, and voila, we have 50,000 in fixed costs for both the highest month and the lowest month. Now, just one thing that drives me nuts about this method is you can't plug it into any month. It only works on the highest and lowest because we're looking at kind of the extremes. It does not give us the same amount for each month, which theoretically fixed costs should be fixed month to month to month. But this is just a method. It's kind of like an average where it's looking, again, at the most extremes, the highest and the lowest. And it's coming up with just a quick methodology for giving you the number for variable costs and your fixed costs. So it's not a science, but it does give you a quick number of what your total and your variable and your fixed costs are and how to pull them apart without doing a super in-depth analysis that would take a lot of time and kind of it would be very worthwhile to do it and do the long pulled out methodology of figuring out exactly what your fixed costs were. But this is just a quick way and it becomes useful because it's very quick and easy to pull off.